Hey everyone, in this guide, I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step tutorial on how to build a web application that will leverage an IP to geolocation API and transform any regular IP address into some rich geolocation data. We're going to start with the basics of IP address API integration and then work our way up to building a fully functional web application that will be able to detect and display location on a map in real time using JavaScript. Now, by the end of this video, you will have built a web application that looks exactly like this. And on this web application, you're able to enter an IP address into the search bar at the top and click Look up my IP, and you will be presented with boatloads of data that you can use to enhance so many features on your web application that you work on. In this case, we have basic information such as continent, country, region, city, zip code, and even direct coordinates of where the IP is pinging from. And then you can have other things like the connection provider, also time zone, current time, currency, languages, and the list goes on. So whether you want to personalize content, enhance security, or display popular places nearby, IP geolocation can make your app smarter and more user-friendly in more ways than you can think of. Now, let's dive into the code and bring this feature to life. First things first, we're going to need a free IP to geolocation API key. To do that, let's head over to apilayer.com. Just go to their marketplace, and then you will see IP Stack, the very first one. They have a ton of different APIs that you can use, but we're just going to stick with IP Stack. Click on View API, subscribe for free. So we're using this because there's a free version, gives us 100 requests a month, super easy to use for development purposes. They also have their paid plans, which give you more features like currency, time zone, bulk endpoints, and security modules, but just click on Get Free API Key. Then you just want to sign up, fill out all this information. Now, when you log in, you'll be able to see your API key front and center right there. Keep this, hide it, do not put it in your development files, and do not upload it to GitHub. So now that we have our account set up and we have our API key, let's start by making a simple API request. I think it's a good place to start before we get into a project, just so we know that we're getting the data back that we need. So let's go ahead and open a folder. You can create a new folder if you don't have one. I have one already, IP address to geolocation. You can use your favorite code editor. Then we're just going to click on new file, and we're going to call it first fetch. First fetch. Hold on, sorry. File, new file, first dash fetch.js. Create file. Perfect. And so also make sure, one thing's first, make sure that you download Node.js. That's one thing we are going to need. If you want to go ahead, I'll link this website below. It's a Geeks for Geeks website on how to download and install Node.js and NPM. You can just follow along with this and come back to the video when you are done. So now let's create a simple script to test out the IP geolocation API. First, we set up a project folder and we created a file called firstfetch.js. Now let's open up your file in your code editor, and let's start with the following code, right? So first we want to call our constant fetch required. I'm going to make sure that we are using dash fetch as a constant. Perfect. Now we will use this to make our API request. If you're using Node.js, I think version 18 plus, you can just use the native fetch API instead. You don't need to declare one. Now we can make a variable for our access key, and we can put in the access key that we have on the dashboard. Put that in there. Perfect. Then we want to declare an IP address that we are going to use to make the request with for. Let's just do 8888 Google's DNS, and this should return us information about Google's DNS IP address. Now we can call our fetch request, and we can call our API endpoint, which is shown in the documentation as well. If you want to just quickly click on documentation here, and you will have right here the request URL. Now with this, you can just paste that in here. Let's backspace this. Let's format this. And then now we can format to put in our variables here, IP address, and then obviously it's already in here, but just for the dynamic approach, we can just use our variables. Perfect. Now let's call a dot then, and we're going to get our response. For our response, we want to parse it in JSON, and then with this JSON data, we want to console.log, let's just say our geolocation data, perfect, and then console. Now we can console log our data just to see what we get returned from this API request. We can do JSON.stringify and then put our data. Perfect. And then we can also, if need be, catch for an error if we do get an error. Console.error. You can just print out. Perfect. All right. Now let's open up our terminal here, and just to make sure we have node fetch installed, we can write npm install node-fetch 2. Okay, if you run into this, don't worry. We're just going to do it in our command prompt. I think it's just a scope issue. So we're going to just do cd source, cd repos. Make sure it's in here. There it is. It's back one, sorry. CD, make sure it's in here. There it is. CD IP address to geolocation, and then we are going to want to run npm install node-fetch at 2. There you go. We've added 4 packages, and now we can do node first -fetch .js to run this. Required is not defined. Okay, you know what we're going to do? We are just going to do an npm install, and then we are going to. Did I do something wrong here? Oh, I see what I did. Okay, require, not required. Sorry, excuse me. Now we can call node fetch, and now that we've made a request, you can see we have our JSON data all here. So we have the continent North America, country code US, country name, region Ohio, city Glenmont, zip code, longitude, latitude. It gives us our longitude and latitude, fixed type, connection type, right? Location, Washington DC. It gives us a flag, country flag, emoji, and whatnot. So as you can see, our API request is working. That means our API key does work, and this is working perfectly. So now that we have our first request working, our API fetch request working, let's start with building something a lot better. So now we are going to build our IP address to geolocation web app, and let's get something that's resume worthy. So if you're still having trouble looking for a job in big tech, hopefully this web app that tracks and visualizes IP address locations on a map in real time will help you hopefully land your first internship. But we are going to use Node.js with Express for the backend, and then for the front end, just basic HTML and JavaScript, and then we're going to use Leaflet for the map. So our goal is to build something like this. So we have our IP geolocation tracker, look up IP, use my IP. I'm not going to click that because it's going to bring my own IP on the screen. And then we'll have our basic info, location, connection, additional info. And here, if we just put in Google's DNS, look up, right? And now we have it tracked as a marker on a map, gives us all of our basic information and our location coordinates. And then these you must have a premium subscription for. So we're just gonna leave that out for now. So as you can see, pretty cool, pretty cool. It tracks a very, very precise location of where you are using their IP geolocation API. All right, now let's start by setting up our backend. So we're going to set up our server. We can just honestly do it in this directory in and of itself. Let's just open our command line again. And in here, let's cd to source and directory cd to IP address geolocation. And now we want to type in npm init-y. This will create a JSON or a package.json. We've already done this for doing the first one, but we want to install Express and then also node-fetch at 2. We're just going to run it just in case. And let us install Express and Node. Perfect. Now that that's done, let's go back to our code editor, and in here in our main directory, let's create a server.js file. So in this file, at the top, we want to start by declaring the constants that we need to set the server up, right? So we need to configure Express to serve the static files, and then also create the API endpoints that our front end will be using to get the geolocation data in this file. And so our backend will essentially provide an endpoint to look up geolocation data for a specific IP address. I might skip out on my own IP address endpoint that I made on that example, just because it's not really necessary for what we're going to be doing. And then we also want to be able to serve the front end, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files using our endpoints in this server.js. So let's start off by declaring our constants. Okay, now that we've declared our constants, we want the app to use the static files from a subfolder that we will make later on, where we store our index.html and other app files. So let's do that. Next, let's add our endpoints to our server that are going to be called from our front end, and then we're going to also have our app listen to these endpoint calls. Now we're going to want to serve our main HTML file. Now we want to listen to our application for that port number. Now that your backend is all set, let's move on to building a nice front end. So this is basically all we need, just our endpoint, serving our main front end file, and then also listening to the port and making sure we have our path set up with Express. So for your front end, let's start by creating a subfolder inside of our main directory and call it public. And then inside here, we want to create a new file called index.html. Now you can build your front end however you like to use this data. I'm just going to do it the way that I showed you guys in the beginning of the video. You guys can go about and do this whole front end your way entirely on yourself or on your own. But yeah, I'm going to speed through this process just to show you guys how I built the front end. But you guys can manipulate this back end however you want with your front end and how you want to make it. So make sure that you are incorporating Leaflet as a style sheet. I will paste the link for it below. But essentially, this is what it is. So you want to make sure that you have your unpackage.com leaflet and your leaflet CSS right in your header file, in your header tag, under your header tag as a style sheet link. Now make sure you add your source package as well for Leaflet so we can have our map on display. And then also make sure that you are declaring your script for your app.js, which we will make right after this. So now we have to create a new file called app.js in the same directory as our index.html. And this file is in charge of adding functionality to our front end or the front end of your page. And it'll utilize the endpoints of our server file to parse the JSON data that we will be getting from that fetch request and plotting it on the map for one, and then also displaying our information in those info cards that we created. Okay, so I'm going to start by adding the map to the front end and adding an event listener to initialize the map and add a tile layer to give us the actual map images. Now we want to make sure that we have our street map.png, so I'll also paste this link in the description for you to copy paste over when you're creating your tile layer. So now that we've added our map to the front end by adding our event listener and our declaring our marker for it, we can now move over to grabbing every DOM element that we have on our front end so we can make changes based on what we get from our server side to the front end elements. Now we are going to declare our asynchronous function that we will call our server endpoint to get our geolocation data using IPStack's API. Now we can create our update UI function, which will populate our front end with the data we get from the server side backend that makes the request to IPStack's API and returns our geolocation data. Now with the data we have, we can look at IPStack's documentation to see what the response looks like and the values that they return. So as you can see, country name is valued as country underscore name and country code is country underscore code. We have longitude, latitude, so we will use these to display them on our front end as the variables. Now we are going to update our map to show our location on our leaflet map with the latitude and longitude if they are available. So what this does here is has a pop-up that appears wherever the marker is placed on the map. If it is moved or either one has to be added to the map when we have our latitude and longitude from a request. Now let's make a handler for our search button so when we type in an IP, we can commence our request using this button. So now you've got all of the pieces in place to run your server with and view your application. What you can do now is you just type in node server.js into your command prompt, open your local host, and this is what it should look like. So now you can enter an IP address here, and you can press the lookup button. Okay, so I found the issue. I accidentally need to change this back to just value. There we go. So now you run this. This is what you have. Now if you type in the IP address and click look up, it should not give you what you want. So this is why debugging and learning how to debug is very important, because when I do this, look up IP, inspect my console, I get a cannot see properties of null. So when I click on this, update UI, location info. So now I will go to my code editor and go to my location info, and over here I have it displayed by get element by ID, and it's correct here. But now if I go to my index.html and look at my location info, which is right here, I have it set to a class instead of an ID, and I have it selected by get element by ID here. So let's just change this to ID. Perfect. Now, when we load our application, again, 8888 lookup. Perfect. There we go. So now we have it. Our coordinates get filled on the map. It gives us our basic information, our location, and yeah. Now let me make this look a little prettier. I will do some CSS and I will be right back. And let's give it a refresh, and voila, look at that. Now, if we do our lookup IP, perfect. We have our info cards here, presents our basic information and our location. Now, apart from the basic information and location information that we have currently, the paid subscription models that they have also give you a currency module, a time zone module, a connection module. You will also have access to a bulk endpoint and then a security module, which will help you have higher security to see if there's a untrusted IP address or a address coming from an unsecure location that you can block from your website. So congratulations, you have now built a resume-worthy geolocation features with IP Stack using their geolocation API. And we've covered making, the basic API calls and then also creating that full-fledged web application with a leaflet map visualization. And so, the applications for this are endless, whether you want to customize content based on a visitor locating your website from a certain area, showing prices in local currencies, even implementing like geofencing as far as it can go, right? And you can even, for the paid models, you can detect suspicious logins from unexpected locations and even track user demographics by region as well. Now, I will leave all the additional sources in the description below, and I'll also provide you with the link to my GitHub to this so you can see the project that I made, which is essentially just this, a little bit more features, a little bit more added stuff to it. But yeah, I will leave all the information in the description below. Feel free to check out everything. Feel free to check out IP Stack's website, learn about their documentation, and good luck with everything, and have a good day.